The Sexual Revolution, Trade of Cheap Flesh. In the United States of America, on the screen of the NBC television channel, since 1991, one of the most widely popular programs airs under the title, The Maury Show, also known as, You Are Not the Father. In this program, a woman invites a group of men with whom she has had relationships, all subjected to DNA testing with the aim of determining the true parent of her child. It does not limit itself to casual liaisons alone. In some episodes, married couples are hosted to confirm the parentage of their offspring. Then, the results of these analyses, which in most cases disprove paternity and reveal spousal infidelity, are displayed openly amid the cheers and screams of the audience, evoking the barbaric spectacles of ancient Roman amphitheaters, offering a spectacle that hardly calls for any form of edification. However, before one praises our somewhat cohesive society, or conversely, before one utilizes this moral decay, openness, or freedom, label it as you will, as proof of progress and refinement, one must deliberate carefully. For the story is not as superficial as it initially appears, it possesses a deeper, more perilous dimension. The Western world of yesteryears was not as it is today. Yet, this state of moral decline and erosion of values is not a momentary occurrence, a product of chance, or a natural result of the Western society's revolution against traditions, laws, and customs. Rather, it was preceded by decades of preparation. Renowned professor of social history and cultural history at Princeton University, Faramers Dab Hoywala, elucidated that Western society, even until the 16th century, deemed extramarital relations as a crime punishable by law. He provided an example from an incident in England in 1612, where a man and a woman were convicted of engaging in sexual intercourse outside of wedlock. The court sentenced them to exile, binding them to the rear of a cart paraded through the city streets while a man lashed them with a whip, and the people pelted them with stones, subjecting them to public humiliation and general deterrence. This is but one example among tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of similar cases. Such punishments were an integral part of state law and a common practice throughout the Christian world. People did not condemn it. Those proven guilty of the crime of adultery would face flogging or imprisonment, and in some instances, even execution. In that era, the Western world comprehended the inherent dangers of extramarital relations. The proliferation of sexual chaos led to social chaos, the spread of diseases, the dissolution of families, and above all, the wrath of the divine. This divine wrath, as mentioned in the Gospels, didn't just fall upon the transgressors of indecency, it encompassed the entire society, as seen in the stories of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, also mentioned in the Quran, and the people of Lot. This belief was rooted in the Western society's understanding of the significance of morality, values, and Christian religious principles. They believed that preserving social order and promoting moral values would protect society, ensuring peace and stability. People in the ancient Western world could distinguish between right and wrong, even beyond the teachings of the Church or the Holy Scriptures. However, this society underwent a transformation due to what Faramers termed the First Sexual Revolution, which occurred as a result of intellectual shifts in the 18th century, urban expansion, and the emergence of new ways of living. This revolution was founded on an intellectual movement that advocated for the abandonment of religion and its constraints, and the liberation from the fear of God, his anger, and retribution. These changes led to a transformation of social, cultural, and ethical concepts in Western society. People's perspectives on values and principles rooted in religion shifted, and their thinking regarding matters of sexuality and personal relationships evolved. They broke free from the traditional constraints imposed by religious teachings. This era came to be known as the Enlightenment, built on a philosophical notion of secularism that is still embraced by a broad segment of the population to this day. It posits that while God created the world, He does not intervene in it, but rather observes it from afar without interfering in the course of events or human affairs. Following these changes, the feminist movement emerged, seeking women's liberation. This led to a rise in the percentage of illegitimate children in England from 1% in the 16th century to 25% in the 18th century and then to 40% by the 19th century. This increase occurred despite the availability and usage of condoms since 1870, as noted by the biopsychologist Nigel Barber. Thus, laws in the ancient Western societies criminalized fornication, with offenders subjected to penalties, at times including death. This was rooted in the rejection of such practices by human nature, and believers in almost all religions knew that a society where extramarital sexual relations and sexual deviance were prevalent would crumble and perish. Over time, European society witnessed a partial opening as the Enlightenment thinkers successfully separated religion from the state. People rid themselves of religious authority that had dominated Europe during the Middle Ages. The Church consented to the regulation of licensed prostitution as a means to prevent the spread of fornication and sexual deviance, deeming it a necessary evil and a measure that couldn't be avoided, otherwise, the consequences would be worse. St. Thomas Aquinas, the rigorous theologian, once stated, "If prostitution were suppressed, lusts would overthrow society." Nonetheless, with the advent of the Victorian era in 1837, Queen Victoria waged a battle against all forms of illicit relations. The modesty of women became a symbol of their status in society, with prostitutes distinguishing themselves from virtuous women and daughters of the upper social classes through their attire. The dress of women from the aristocratic or conservative classes typically comprised a long-sleeved dress with a wide skirt, along with undergarments, a woolen or fur jacket serving as an outer layer, a variety of hats in different sizes and shapes, shawls to cover the head and shoulders, and neck covers. Revealing a woman's neck and the upper part of her chest below the neckline was considered a sign of her involvement in prostitution. This cultural norm persisted until the early 20th century. This historical account, dating back to 1900 in Manchester City, England, illustrates how women dressed during that period, even after the first sexual revolution. As for the United States of America, it remained a conservative nation until the 1950s, to the extent that law enforcement officers would measure a woman's attire to ensure it did not breach the legal limits. Indeed, this may sound peculiar, but these United States were once a different entity before they fell under the influence of the demons of the financial system, which worked to commodify everything, even the female body, in the name of freedom and openness. In the year 1960, the first spark ignited what has come to be known as the sexual revolution, aptly termed the Second Sexual Revolution, following the initial upheaval in Europe. This revolution was predicated upon the Enlightenment ideas of illustrious figures, foremost among them the renowned Jewish physician and founder of psychoanalytic psychology, Sigmund Freud, and the physician and psychologist Wilhelm Reich, who advocated for the liberation of sexual desire and cautioned against its suppression through legal, moral, or religious constraints. Before long, Hugh Hefner established the provocative and male-oriented Playboy magazine, while Helen Brown founded Cosmopolitan, a publication targeted towards women. Consequently, matters pertaining to family, marital responsibilities, were portrayed as burdens from which men needed emancipation. Moreover, the tasks of pregnancy, childbirth, and child-rearing were deemed obstacles that women must be liberated from to attain sexual freedom, distancing themselves from these responsibilities, thereby achieving personal independence beyond the dominion of a male-centric society. The invention and proliferation of contraceptive methods, coupled with the federal abortion laws of 1973, expedited this transformation. In this manner, a gradual dismantling of religious and familial values commenced under the pretense of women's liberation. The malevolent forces employed subliminal persuasion, beguiling the slumbering masses, reshaping concepts, and manipulating the subconscious mind to promulgate their insidious ideas in a seductive, deceptive guise. The proliferation of cinema, followed by television dramas and the advent of the Internet, played pivotal roles in undermining moral values and wholesome instincts. The fatal blow, however, came with the widespread availability of explicit films, freely accessible to all, alongside the emergence of social networking and dating platforms. Nudity became a fashionable trend, a symbol of progress, while modesty became synonymous with ignorance, backwardness, and retrogression. Calls for reform were branded as terror threats to national stability. By the 1970s, the counterculture of the hippies, established by American poet Allen Ginsberg, had become a social phenomenon sweeping across both the United States and Europe. Youth found in opposition to conventional values and morals, as well as in drugs and unrestrained sexual indulgence, a means of rebelling against societal norms and traditions. Naturally, it was imperative to encapsulate this cultural shift in a captivating artistic form that would ensnare the unsuspecting youth, akin to moths drawn to a flame. The British musical ensemble, the Beatles, undertook this mission. Nevertheless, some thinkers discerned the precipice towards which society was rapidly hurtling and commenced issuing warnings of the cataclysmic consequences that would ensue from the sexual revolution. In 1964, the philosopher and intellectual James Burnham penned his book, Suicide of the West, cautioning that unbridled freedom devoid of ethical and religious constraints would mark the beginning of America's downfall. Anticipating these tumultuous changes and societal maladies resulting from the sexual revolution, the American sociologist of Russian descent, Peter M. A. Sorokin, foretold them in his book, The American Sex Revolution, published in 1956. Astonishingly, his predictions materialized with remarkable accuracy. Other intellectuals re-evaluated their convictions as the dire consequences of the sexual revolution began to loom on the horizon. Among them was the American author and feminist activist, Betty Friedan, renowned for her work, The Feminine Mystique, published in 1963, where she correlated the unhappiness afflicting women to their confinement within the roles of motherhood and housewifery. However, in 1981, Betty Friedan released her book, The Second Stage, wherein she revised her earlier ideas after conducting interviews with working women who declared their discontent. They revealed that career success had led to missed opportunities for finding life partners and establishing families. Additionally, the American author, physician, and producer, Bernard Nathanson, presented a renowned documentary titled The Silent Scream, wherein he exposed the perils and horrors of abortion, which had become legal under federal law. Nathanson enlisted a young physician to film an actual abortion procedure, highlighting that it was one of 4,000 such procedures conducted daily in the United States. Remarkably, the experienced physician who performed the procedure had conducted over 10,000 abortions, despite still being in the prime of his youth. When this young physician observed the abortion procedure on the ultrasound screen, referred to as the silent screen, he was overcome with horror and abstained from performing any further abortions. Even the woman upon whom the procedure had been performed, a strong and emancipated individual, was deeply affected by what she had witnessed, no longer defending the right to abortion. While we have provided a link to this film in the description for the sake of authenticity and credibility, we do not recommend viewing it due to its graphic depiction of a crime against an innocent human being, a product of moral decay and the result of a diabolical revolution. With an earnest commitment to fairness and impartiality, let us take a step back and examine the causes behind the emergence of the sexual revolution, whether it be the first one in Europe or the second in the United States. Since the dawn of recorded history, women have existed on the periphery, devoid of rights, degraded, diminished, and scorned, even considered impure. Certainly, a detailed explanation will follow later. Nevertheless, they constitute half of society, and it was imperative to liberate them from the shackles of men who regarded them as soulless beings. Hence, the sexual revolution became a necessary civilizational step to restore women's status and curtail the violence directed toward them. Consequently, all of Europe cast off the religious dominion of the male clergy, paving the way for the Industrial Revolution and the construction of the civilization we recognize today. Simultaneously, the United States ascended to become a global powerhouse. Conversely, those societies clinging to religious values remained at the lower rungs of civilization, lagging behind the tide of progress. However, this radiant image of scientific and intellectual advancement, as propagated by the West, conceals a hidden decay that gnaws at the foundation of this ostentatious exterior. This edifice, adorned on the surface, is destined to crumble sooner or later, for the rise of a civilization is intrinsically linked to the values and ethics that embody its spiritual strength. The collapse always commences with the erosion of this strength. Recalling Arnold Toynbee's theory of challenge and response, expounded in his monumental work, A Study of History, across 12 volumes, a laborious endeavor spanning 41 years, we discern, after his meticulous examination of history, the causes for the rise and fall of civilizations. This luminous image conceals an unsightly visage, one hidden from view on screens so as not to rouse the slumbering and jolt the heedless into recognizing the importance of religious and spiritual values. We persist in the belief that our purported backwardness is the result of our adherence to these values, contrary to the actual truth. Statistics vividly illustrate this grim facet and the dark underbelly of Western civilization. In a report by the National Network to End Domestic Violence in the United States, released on July 26, 2017, it was revealed that a person falls victim to sexual assault every 98 seconds. And as per the 2023 report, the rate of assault has been increasing, with an individual now being assaulted every 68 seconds. Furthermore, there are 463,634 rape and sexual assault victims in the United States alone each year. Among these victims, 45% fall within the age range of 12 to 34, and 1 out of every 6 women has experienced an attempted rape. These alarming figures shed light on a shocking reality. exposing the sexual crimes transpiring in Western society. They unveil a dark aspect born from the erosion of moral and spiritual values, the very foundation of a robust civilization. Rape Crisis, an organization dedicated to monitoring sexual assaults in England, reports that 1 in 4 women has experienced sexual assault. Despite 67,169 cases being recorded by the police in 2022, this number represents only 2% of the actual incidents, as most women do not report these assaults. Approximately 40% believe it is embarrassing. 38% think the police won't assist them. And 34% consider it demeaning. According to the same study, 6.5 million women in England and Wales have been raped at least once since reaching the age of 16. These are but examples of terrifying statistics, and nearly every developed nation in Europe, according to materialistic standards, bears similar reports, studies, and statistics that unmistakably point to the hidden, unsightly face and the consequences of liberation, stemming from rebellion against morals, values, and religion. Did the sexual revolution succeed in eliminating violence against women? Quite the opposite. It exacerbated the problem and diminished the worth of women, rendering them easy targets for harassment and rape. Western men, finding dissatisfaction in conventional sexual relationships, which have become readily accessible without restraint, have turned to rape in pursuit of this elusive gratification. Lisa Wade elucidated this in her book, American Hookup: The New Culture of Sex on Campus, wherein the term American hookup denotes a phenomenon or cultural pattern centered around fleeting and superficial relationships rather than long-term commitments or profound emotional attachments. Lastly, the website Sex Assault in Canada, dedicated to monitoring sexual assault cases, published a startling report, revealing that half of the perpetrators of sexual crimes are either married or in long-term relationships, indicating that they do not suffer from sexual repression. The sexual revolution did not liberate women, it reduced them to commodities. Commodities adhere to the law of supply and demand, and with supply surpassing demand, men have shifted towards recreational sex instead of forming families. This shift has led to a decline in marriage rates, a decrease in births in the West, and the proliferation of single mothers. Because women are inherently inclined towards motherhood and emotional and familial stability, the sexual revolution disrupted this goal. Consequently, psychological illnesses have proliferated among women, primarily depression, while men have suffered from organic diseases due to excessive, deviant, and unregulated sexual practices, such as human papillomavirus, genital herpes, syphilis, gonorrhea, and other ailments. Additionally, societal diseases have pushed nations toward inevitable collapse. Nevertheless, amidst all this, we find within our Arab and Islamic society voices that seek to ensnare us in the same trap, relying on the ignorance of the masses, their superficial and limited perspectives on matters, and citing the scientific advancements achieved by the West, linking these advancements to absolute freedom. They justify their views by claiming that Islam has demeaned women, confining them behind veils or veiling, instructing them to stay within their homes, and depriving them of their rights, even in matters of inheritance. They argue for the need to break free from moral constraints in order to keep pace with the progress of civilization. They repetitively espouse the same fallacies, imprinting the minds of the youth and constructing a facade of lies. On the surface, these lies promise societal liberation, progress, and advancement, while beneath, they seek to uproot this society from its very roots. Most of the voices advocating such fallacies are either secularists for hire or misguided extremists with the aim of stripping Arabs and Muslims of their identity, vilifying and tarnishing anyone who calls for or defends religious values, in an attempt to undermine the highest principles and project illusions onto the forefront as symbols of culture, enlightenment, and success. Because they are aware that undermining society begins with dismantling the family, and dismantling the family starts with the degradation of women, they have played with her mind, using glossy slogans. Feminist movements have emerged, calling for women's freedom and their participation in the workforce, as if Islam had demeaned them and imprisoned them, while portraying the West as the champion of women's rights and dignity, even though the reality is completely contrary. In the eyes of the ancient Greeks, women were considered a temptation of the devil, describing them as poison trees to be avoided. They even offered their women for sale or rent. Aristotle stated, "A woman is an incomplete man, nature has left her in the lowest rank of creatures." Socrates claimed, "The existence of women is the greatest origin and source of trouble in the world." The Romans regarded women as soulless beings, created solely for pleasure, cheap commodities that men could dispose of as they wished, holding their lives and deaths in their hands. They placed an iron yoke, called museler, on their understanding, depriving them of the right to possess or acquire wealth or even inherit from their husbands after their deaths. As for the Persians, they considered women as mere goods to be bought and sold, granting men the right to confine them at home or even kill them. The Jews, in their denigration of women, considered them a cheap commodity and a curse for having seduced Adam. The Arab perspective in the pre-Islamic era was not different, as women were bought and sold, not entitled to inheritance, and considered a source of shame. The practice of female infanticide, burying infant girls alive, was widespread. In more advanced eras, Rome determined that women lacked a soul or an afterlife, concluding that they would not inherit the hereafter. Even in the 15th century, wives were sold in England, and women were forbidden from reading the Bible. They were not counted among citizens, and they had no right to possess even their own clothing. In the year 586, the French held a conference to debate whether women were human or not, and they concluded that women were indeed human but were created to serve men exclusively. In the wake of the French Revolution, women were not allowed to handle finances due to their perceived incapability. Then came the era of freedom, progress, enlightenment, and equality. Has women truly been emancipated? They have indeed been liberated in appearance only, yet they continue to be commodities bought and sold, a successful tool for advertising, and cheap flesh traded either directly or indirectly. As for Islam, which is accused by the malicious, the paid, and the ignorant of demeaning women, it is the only doctrine that preserved, honored, elevated, and safeguarded them, upholding their dignity within the bounds of religious texts from the Quran and the Sunnah. In the Holy Quran, there is an entire surah called Al-Nisa, dedicated to elucidating and safeguarding their rights, imposing severe penalties on those who transgress against them. In the authentic hadith of the Prophet Mohammed, peace be upon him, he said, "Treat women kindly, for they are entrusted to you." The French historian Gustave Le Bon remarked, "Europeans learned chivalrous principles and the respect for women from Muslims, who elevated women from the lowly status they were in, contrary to common belief." Islam granted women true liberation, ensuring their right to life, upbringing, education, and benevolence, whether as wives or mothers. It affirmed their right to ownership, buying, selling, gifting, and charitable giving with their own wealth. Islam guaranteed women's right to mahr, dower, and obligated men to provide for them and treat them kindly, so they may be honored, dignified, and cherished, preserved and protected, sought after rather than seeking. As for those who claim that Islam is unjust towards women in matters of inheritance because they inherit half of what men inherit and demand equality in this regard, these individuals are either foolish or motivated by ulterior motives. Equality in inheritance is not justice for women, as believed by those with enlightened minds. Dr. Mohamed Amara explained that the criteria for inheritance have nothing to do with gender but are primarily based on proximity in relationship, with the position of the inheriting generation being a factor. The closer the inheriting generation is, the larger their share of the inheritance. Women can inherit the same as men, or even more than men, in 30 different scenarios, while men inherit half of what women do in only 4 scenarios. If we encounter examples that demean women or deprive them of their rights, it is not Islam that is responsible for these practices but rather cultural legacies. Islam is innocent of such matters. The same doctrine remains valid, and it is not to blame if it is distorted by the ignorant or manipulated by those with ulterior motives. Attributing individual practices to the religion is a clear injustice, a false accusation, and a prelude to sinister schemes that aim to replace it on the chessboard and execute their plans without resistance. The wolves have attacked minds, spreading pornography and deviancy to undermine the beliefs of youth. They convinced women to relinquish their significant role for the sake of pursuing careers. The balance was disrupted, and a gap emerged, paid for by generations who found no guide but the misleading media. The demons played with minds, altering concepts, killing modesty and virtue, and casting doubt on all constants. They executed a long-term plan that persuaded us that we are societies plagued by sexual obsession due to religious constraints and customs. A brief look at the Wise Voter statistics, which monitors the highest rape rates globally, reveals that Sweden, with the highest legal gender equality, ranks 4th in the world. France ranks 12th, followed by the United States in 13th place. None of the top 82 countries in the list include any Arab country. Kuwait ranks 83rd, while Sudan and Morocco are ranked 85th and 86th, respectively. The remaining Arab countries are listed lower, with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Oman at the bottom. How then did we believe in the false spotlight that they cast on individual cases? How were we deceived by framing? Do you still think all of this is a conspiracy theory? Please seek out the book, America and Sexual Genocide, by the Palestinian humanities professor Munir Al-Akash, and also review the list of books, sources, and statistics mentioned in the video description box on YouTube. You will be shocked by the truth, and you will realize that the grasp of the Samaritan holds more secrets than you can imagine. But please, do not forget that the plans of God are ultimately victorious, and those who have wronged are going to know to what kind of return they will be returned.